Well, good evening and welcome to the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center's program. My name is Thorin Tritter. I am the Museum and Programming Director at the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center, which is located in Glen Cove, New York. Before I say more about tonight's program, let me highlight that we scheduled our program today to mark UN Human Rights Day. 72 years ago today, on December 10th, 1948, the UN General Assembly unanimously passed the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, a milestone document that proclaims the inalienable rights which everyone is entitled to as a human being. The action by the UN on this date was a direct outgrowth of the Holocaust and the global realization that the nations of the world needed to lay some basic principles about human rights out in order to try to prevent future genocides. We know, sadly, that other genocides have taken place since the end of World War II, but we mark this day both to remember the Holocaust that preceded the UN's action and as part of a constant effort to try and live up to the ideals laid out in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The UN's website for Human Rights Day this year, for 2020, has a specific plea calling for organizations and the general public to showcase practical and inspirational examples that can contribute to recovering better and fostering more resilient and just societies. Our program tonight, I believe, fits well within those goals as we hold our post-screening discussion about the film Defying the Nazis, The Sharps' War. The film was released several years ago, but tells an incredible story and one that's not, I don't think, very well known. So we wanted to draw attention to it again. If you haven't had time to see the film, it tells the story of Waitstill and Martha Sharp, who left the comfort of their Massachusetts home, where Waitstill served as a Unitarian minister, to go to Europe in February of 1939 to help Jewish refugees in Czechoslovakia. Leaving their two young children behind, they were some of the very few Americans who responded to the call by Jews struggling to get away from Nazi rule. In recognition for their efforts, Yad Vashem honored them with the title of Righteous Among the Nations. There are, as you may know, thousands of people who have gained that distinction and honor. People who risked their own lives to save the lives of Jews during the Holocaust. What you may not know, however, is how few Americans have earned that honor. Martha and Waitstill Sharp are two of only 5 Americans to be awarded the title of Righteous Among the Nations. The Sharps are a member of a very elite group. I know you will hear more about the Sharps in a moment from our guest speaker, along with the resonance of their work today. And I also want to introduce the woman behind tonight's program, who will introduce our guest. But before we do that, I do want to put in a plug, as I often do, for some of our other upcoming programs. And so I put them on the screen here. You can see we've got 2 programs next Wednesday. The first is a yoga class where virtual chair yoga, open to all ages and all abilities. And then at 12 o'clock next Wednesday, I'll hold my next Curator's Corner, which is a weekly program I hold where I look at a particular object or image in our exhibition. And in this case, I'm going to be looking at a photograph of a burning book event that took place in Hamburg in May of 1933. And then one more item to mention, we have a special program coming up next Thursday at 6:30 p.m. I hope you'll join us for a post-screening discussion of Deli Man, which offers an entertaining look at the history of the Jewish deli. Our program is going to include 2 of the deli men highlighted in the film, who will talk about both their work in the movie and their work as deli men and sustaining the Jewish culture of delis. There's a small donation that we asked for that program, but I think it's well worth it. I should add also that HMTC is partnering with Ben's Deli to offer special dinner boxes that can be picked up or delivered next Thursday to make the experience a fully sensory one. So you'll see the discussion, be part of the discussion, and taste the deli. Okay, let's talk more about tonight's program. To introduce, I'm going to stop sharing my screen there. To introduce our speaker tonight, let me just click on a few buttons here. I would like to call on Taub, the woman behind all of the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center's film programs. Mireille is a Holocaust survivor who's been volunteering as an educator and docent here at the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center for many years. In addition to her work with school groups and serving on our Education Advisory Committee, in 2013, she launched the David Taub Real Upstanders film series in honor of her late husband, who was also a Holocaust survivor. To date, Mireille has helped bring more than 20 film programs onto the HMTC calendar, all of which have highlighted the need to fight against the urge to simply be a bystander and instead to encourage us all to be upstanders. So Mireille, thank you for all you do for the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center, and I pass the baton to you for the introduction to tonight's program. Oh, you're muted, I think. Let me see here. Can you, still muted?
Is that better?
There we go. Great.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for attending another film in our Real Upstanders film series. The HMTC Real Upstanders film series is named in honor of my husband, David Taub, who was a hidden child in a small village in the heart of France during the Second World War. Although he could not escape out of France, he was protected by a family and community that, as we found out in later years, also gave haven to several other Jewish children who were placed into refuge in that isolated place. Unable to leave France, David found refuge in the movie theater, which remained open in those perilous times. As you may have noted, our museum mission statement is to teach through a variety of platforms about the dangers of anti-Semitism, racism, bullying, and all other manifestations of intolerance. We promote resistance to prejudice and advocate respect for every human being. Obviously, that includes all those who seek safety in perilous times. The Sharps were remarkable people. They would have felt right at home in our museum. Representing the Unitarian Universalist Church, they willingly and knowingly undertook a high rescue missions, several of them. Their family, as well as their personal lives, which would be forever impacted by their daring deeds. With us this evening is David Angelos to speak of the Sharps' activities, as well as to bring us into the ongoing and present need for all of us to consider ourselves as humanists. Unfortunately, life has not changed as we might have liked it to since 1938. There are still people in great danger. David Angelos is the Senior Partnership Officer for Crisis Response with the Cambridge-based Unitarian Universalist Service Committee. He has an extensive background in human rights issues. In his position, David works to identify, develop, and evaluate a human rights grants portfolio focused on supporting and building the long-term capacity of grassroots communities and dealing with both natural and man-made crises. Currently, his work focuses on supporting civil society responses to the Rohingya human rights issue in Burma and Bangladesh, as well as post-Hurricane Dorian recovery in the Bahamas. Thank you so much, David, for coming to join us this evening.
Ray, thank you so much for the kind introduction and the introduction, the story about your husband. It's really inspiring to hear about, and the video series with HMTC is really a wonderful opportunity to really discuss these issues. I am privileged to be here with you all this evening and to talk about the legacy of the Sharps, of Waitstill and Martha. I'm going to share my screen right now. I have a PowerPoint. And please feel free to ask questions in the chat, and it shouldn't take more than about 10 minutes. And after that, we'll be open for Q&A and discussion. So most of you have probably already seen the film, so I won't go over the the storyline. But I can tell you, this year is the 80th anniversary of the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee. And that committee was originally called the Unitarian Service Committee, that was founded after Waitstill and Martha's first trip to Czechoslovakia, or between their first and second trip, I believe, in Czechoslovakia. You can see them here. We had a large online celebration this year about our 80th anniversary, and really honoring their legacy with bold action for future genocide prevention and to assist refugees around the world. We work in 3 critical ways on the ground. We support education and experiences for different Unitarian congregations. We conduct advocacy at the state level, the national level, and the international level through the UN. And we also have a grant-making program that is to directly support many refugee communities, both in across various sectors, including climate change, migrant justice, as well as what we call crisis response, which includes our Rohingya portfolio, which I think aligns most closely with our founding values during the Holocaust. I think the question I wanted to talk about today was, how do we fight against and prevent genocide today? You know, programs like this, I think, are really the opportunity to say, how can we concretize this legacy that the Sharps have created? And at USC, we really try to kind of move forward in those foundational values. Thorin mentioned that today is International Human Rights Day. But I also wanted to point out that yesterday actually was the International Day of Commemoration and Dignity of the Victims of the Crime of Genocide and of the Prevention of this Crime. It's a lot of words, but in 1948, in addition to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, there was also the Genocide Convention, which was made in response to the Holocaust. So the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. And this was really significant, a legal significance for the international community to really put its money where its mouth is with respect to never again, by providing the first international legal definition of genocide. And what a lot of people don't know is that genocide is indeed a legal definition that must be proved in court, a crime that must be proved in a legal court. So today I wanted to talk a little bit about Burma, which I know is probably not on your radar, but it has been the most parallel situation that we can see, and we know history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And for a long time, Burma has been in the news about the ongoing genocide of the Rohingya. Many people don't know much about Burma, but you can see here on this map, it is mainland Southeast Asia's largest country, about the size of France and Belgium combined, slightly larger. It borders Thailand, Laos, China, India, and Bangladesh. Here I have arrows to Rangoon or Yangon, the capital, but the arrow on the left over here is the border area where the Rohingya are from. The yellow piece here is Bangladesh, and the green part in Western Burma here is called Rakhine State. Burma gained its independence in 1948, and it was under one of the longest military dictatorships from 1962 until 2012. It has one of the longest ongoing civil wars since its independence in 1948, and it has one of the lowest Human Development Index rankings in Asia and certainly in the world. Its per capita GDP is less than $1,500 per year, and many people since 2012 have called it one of the last untapped natural frontiers of the world. Many of you, if you know anything about Burma or Myanmar as it's called officially, you know one thing: it's Aung San Suu Kyi, and she is a peace icon. She won the Nobel Peace Prize while under 15 years under house arrest. This is her in 2012 accepting the Nobel Prize when she was released from house arrest, and when the military government decided to create what they call a roadmap to democracy. And this was her last December, defending the military actions at the International Court of Justice in The Hague in the Netherlands, in which many people saw this as her fall from grace and her fall from iconic status. The case at the International Court of Justice is actually based on the protection of genocide, the protection and responsibilities of states with respect to their obligations under the Genocide Convention. So that's why that treaty I was talking about that was in 1948 is so critical today to ensuring that that the world reacts and responds and rejects genocidal actions. Just a little bit about the Burma political background. I won't go into too much detail, but many legal experts have found that there is an ongoing genocide of the Rohingya people. Over 700,000 fled to Bangladesh in 2017 after a mass violent expulsion. But there was all creating what has become the world's largest refugee camp on the Bangladesh-Burma border. Around 400,000 remain in what many people have referred to as apartheid-like conditions or internment camps, essentially. They're closed-off villages or they're actual refugee camps domestically inside Rakhine State. And in addition to that, I also wanted to point out that in addition to the camps, there are also non-camp-based refugees most of whom have fled to Malaysia, about 250,000 who are in peninsular Malaysia, in Kuala Lumpur and in the northern areas where there's quite a large industrial and agricultural industry. With respect to the Burma political background, the Rohingya issue is deeply intertwined with the ongoing civil war that has been going on since the 1940s. Burma is one of the few countries that has ongoing conflicts with its ethnic minorities at every border in the country. And this is all what many see as the military's divide and rule strategy across Myanmar, across the country, against specifically ethnic and religious minorities. And what makes many people specifically claim the Rohingya issue as genocide is that the Rohingya are Muslim. They're a Muslim minority in the West, in the western part of the country. And they are specifically targeted, delegitimized, discriminated against, disenfranchised because of their religious and ethnic background. Among all of the other conflicts in the country, what's interesting to note is that even despite those conflicts, the Burmese people and the Burmese government still acknowledge those ethnic minorities as citizens, whereas the Rohingya are not acknowledged as citizens. They have been administratively disenfranchised and discriminated against, administratively erased, essentially, over the years. And our strategy, how are we countering this, these genocidal actions? Well, we have kind of 3 different programs and where we target our support. The first is grassroots mobilization. It's education programs and awareness raising. That's both at the primary level, but also youth activists around the world among the Rohingya diaspora. Our second type of program is advocacy and leadership. I mentioned we do a lot of domestic and international advocacy. Currently in the US, there is a campaign to actually call this and make a genocide determination. So call the situation what it is. If the State Department or the US Congress makes a genocide determination, that in itself will give credence to the legal cases that are happening at the International Court of Justice. And finally, the third piece of our grant-making program is justice and accountability. And that's not only holding the Burmese military account at these international courts, but really at the grassroots level, talking about what does justice look like for the victims and survivors of this genocide, and how can you really transform their lives to make sure that these human rights abuses and crimes that there is accountability for these human rights abuses and crimes, and that they're able to move forward and actually live as part of the country that they were born in. And just to give you an idea, we currently have 12 different organizational partners around the world. And these are 2 of them. The man on the left, his name is Tun Kin. He is a Rohingya refugee based in the UK. And this is him in front of an Argentinian courthouse in Buenos Aires after filing the first universal jurisdiction case, accusing the military government and Aung San Suu Kyi of committing war crimes, including genocide and crimes against humanity. This woman on the left, her name is Weiwei Nu. She's in Yangon in Rangoon, and she has been conducting education programs for Rohingya youth and trying to build up their capacity to actually participate. The disenfranchisement and kind of administrative erasure of the Rohingya has essentially led to generations of Rohingya now, 3 generations, who have been unable to participate in public life. So she and her organization are trying to rebuild the capacity of the remaining Rohingya in the country to make sure that they are can safely still stay apart and be integrated into the community and maintain their rightful place as Burmese citizens. And another thing that we support, just a photo I wanted to share with y'all, is movement building in action. This is the first ever international youth conference that UUSC helped to convene through our partner who was on the previous page. This was about 35 different Rohingya youth from around the world, many of them refugees and had to get special permission, or previously refugees who were resettled to third countries. And they were represented, I believe, 17 different countries. So they're a diaspora around the world who are now trying to come together and fight for their rights. I'll leave it at there and open it up to any other questions if folks have any follow-up, and if they want to talk about the legacy of the Sharps and how we're trying to kind of live by that those foundational values at UUSC, I would love to answer any questions and just have a discussion with you all.
Thanks very much, David. And you gave us a lot there, and you were moving quickly. So I think that I hope people will feel comfortable using the Q&A tab and type in some questions. And they could be questions about a lot of the material that David has just talked about what's going on in Burma. They might be more about the film and the earlier history as well. I feel like if you've seen the film and you know the history, and so we asked David to turn his attention to more contemporary issues. But as a starting point, let me just ask you to backpedal a little back to the film. And I know you said that the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee grew out of the Sharps' work in 1939. And so I was just wondering, how well known is the Sharps story in your circle, in the UUSC?
I mean, we consider them our founding members. There were 5 founding staff members, of whom the Sharps were 2. The other 3 were actually another couple, Robert Dexter and his wife Elizabeth, who were the American Unitarian Association's director. After they had conducted a 10-country fact-finding mission in Europe around the same time that the Sharps went. And the 5th founder was a minister, Charles Joy. So those 5 came together to establish the Unitarian Service Committee. That is, when the Unitarian Church became the Unitarian Universalist Church in the 60s, we added the extra U, and it have essentially been operating since 1940 from the work that started in that rescue mission. So now we're no longer a rescue mission. We're not going into the countries to bring people out. Our view now is that we want to empower when we can, or give credence to the work of the grassroots people who can do this themselves, the grassroots activists, and cultivate leadership and an educated and cadre of youth in particular who can get past this, these genocidal acts and grow to take their rightful place in both in their country and internationally.
That brings up another question I was going to ask, which is just about how much time have you spent overseas, or does the UUSC send people over to work overseas? Because that obviously is such a big part of the movie, is the fact that the Sharps, left their family behind. I have 2 kids, and they're not the age of the Sharps kids, but to think about leaving them behind is pretty mind-blowing. And to put the priority on the people who clearly needed much more help than their own kids, no question, but to be willing to do that is huge. And so I wondered, to what degree is that still something that the UUSC staff are facing?
We absolutely do. We absolutely do travel, and I can tell you, I know that's probably the biggest COVID. That's probably been the biggest shift in my life since the COVID pandemic. But it's also actually affected our partners on the ground. Part of our job is actually to work for our partners, much like Martha and Waitstill, 80 years ago. So in addition to the grant making, I'm often embedded into the organizations that we support to help them with advocacy, to bring them to the UN, to use UUSC's platform to make their voice heard, and to bring up their voice and to bring up their perspective and ensure that their perspectives are actually informing policies here in the United States or policies at the UN, for example. So I work directly with affected communities in communications, advocacy strategies, writing, report writing, and other things like that. Again, it's not much of a rescue mission per se. We actually have a very critical piece of our work is also focused on providing humanitarian aid. And so we make grants to a lot of local community-based organizations who are distributing, I mean, over the past year, it's been a lot of PPE equipment in the refugee camps. So micro-enterprise, projects for refugees to sew masks and to distribute masks for public health safety. I have, because of the restrictions, I can't travel, or actually no one can really travel in the refugee camps. But in the past, I actually spent 5 years at the Thai-Burma border, working on the eastern border, working with refugee communities that were bordering Thailand, Laos, and Cambodia. Sorry, Thailand, Laos, and China. So I've worked on Burma, Myanmar since 2003, and on a full-time basis for 12 of those years. And half of that time has been here in the U.S., and the other half has been on the ground.
Again, I want to encourage other people to raise questions, but I have many. So while I have the opportunity, I'm going to go ahead with this. So I'm just wondering about what got you involved and what made you decide that you wanted to commit your life to this task. And maybe I won't ask you to speak for everybody else at the UUSC, but what are the things that are motivating people to work in this field?
Well, to be, completely upfront, I've actually only been at USC for 1 year, but I have known their work as I've worked for other foundations and have known their work for many years, and have worked closely with former USC colleagues.
But and in helping refugees, it
yes.
doesn't have to be just UUSC.
Yes, but I can tell you the thing that really changed my life was visiting a refugee camp in 2001. Meeting people who are my age, who had zero opportunity, and who were, or I shouldn't say zero opportunity, who were taking every single opportunity that they could to make their life better. And those were these informal education programs that could lead to, for example, a US high school GED equivalency. And so it's programs like those that helped people have hope. And really, and many people were being resettled. The U.S. is actually the largest receiver of refugees from Burma, resettled refugees from Burma, and most of those are Christian minorities, Karen and Chin, the Karen and Chin ethnic minority. But now recently, there have been more and more Rohingya refugees coming from Bangladesh and Malaysia. Actually, mostly from Malaysia. A Bangladesh resettlement program hasn't happened yet, but it was that first experience, spending the night in a refugee camp and meeting refugees, that really got me, that hooked me in and really has kept me here. And part of UUSC, that one of the best parts of my job at UUSC is that we're not just a foundation. We don't just give money. It's really, I think Unitarians and UUSC in particular really sees itself as part of a movement. And we bring our congregations, we try to build awareness among Unitarian congregations around the country and actually internationally, to really understand the issues and to see how they can make a difference in their local community, be it with the local refugee community that's been, for example, resettled. The largest Rohingya communities in the US, for example, are in Milwaukee and Chicago, of all places. So we're trying to facilitate, for example, connections between local Unitarian congregations in those cities, or it's for international advocacy. The Unitarians, we do have a constituency, and the Unitarians have a very progressive mindset of, what can we actually do? It's, make a genocide determination, push their congressmen and senators to call this what it is. They have the data. The U.S. still has a lot of political clout internationally, and so it's using our voice to lift up that voice of our constituents. UUSC also has ECOSOC status at the United Nations, and one of the things we're looking to do is increase our presence there at the United Nations, so we can use our platform and our access to bring refugees to the United Nations to tell their story, to ensure that the international community is not forgetting about this, that it is in the media, it is in the, and I think the Rohingya issue, I think, is the human rights issue of our generation. It is the genocide of the 21st century. There are many genocides, in Syria, in Iraq, the Yazidis, there in Rwanda, obviously, in Cambodia, and these have all been legally explored and legally determined. But I think the Rohingya is this intersectional issue of our time because of where it is, the sheer number of people who have been involved, and the real impact of politics, of geopolitics, of China and Asia, of how are we going to put economics and the human greed and before the life and human rights of people. I really think, and that's why it keeps me here and keeps me in this work.
Wow. One of the things that strikes me about the Sharp story is the fact that they were not Jewish. And they, as I understand it, and I think this comes out a little in the film, that when they're sent over, there's kind of a lot of concern about what's going on in Prague in 1939, because there were Unitarians who were in Prague. But when they got there, and you may be able to correct me, but when they got there, they saw that it was really not the Unitarians who were the people who they needed to focus on, but the Jews. And so and you mentioned, I know that the Rohingya are a Muslim minority. And again, we've got a Unitarian organization, the UUSC, among others, and I don't mean to solely talk about them, but growing out of the Sharp story, like this Unitarian group that's fighting for these people who are of a different religious faith. Does any of that fit in with what the UUSC does? Does religion have any part of this? What is the connection?
It's the dignity of all people, and I think it's being targeted for religion. That Unitarians. I myself am not Unitarian. My family is from the Philippines, and I grew up Catholic. But I think it's this ideal of the dignity of all people and the rights of religion, and to not be discriminated against based on religion. That's I think this dignity of all people and all religions is really, really under it. It's like a foundational value of Unitarianism. I think I've actually met many Unitarians who are also another religion, which is still it was new to me when I realized this, but I realized it's spiritual values, but and a community that comes together that is really looking at protecting and honoring the dignity of all people. And I think when we see a situation so grave, UUSC has responded, and I think they try to respond in a very in an active way that's more than in 21st century parlance, that's more than clickbait. Like we need to actually have substantive actions, and we need to put our money where our mouth is if we're really going to live out these foundational values. And I think the Sharps live that through and through, and they sacrificed a lot personally. During the film, you mentioned that they weren't able to see their children very often, and some of the comments from their children were really heartbreaking. Because when you're separated from your parents so much, and they're so far away, and it's an issue that a child might not be able to comprehend because it's so far, and their marriage suffered because of it. as might have been mentioned in the film. I think they divorced, but they divorced amicably, and went on to establish their own careers in this, but they still honored the mission that became UUSC throughout their lives.
Yeah. I think, I mean, I think you get a sense in the film of the cost, the personal cost to them, even though they chose to stick with working with refugees and working with Jewish refugees in particular. I know Martha became very active in getting children out and going and continuing to work with Israel and the needs of Israel in the aftermath of the war. But yeah, you definitely see it. And I think there is some irony, or I'm not sure if irony is the right word, but the fact that Martha focuses particularly on the needs of children,
yes,
while she knows that, she hasn't been able to attend to her own children. And there's some of the shots of the kids in the film and what they say, so grown up at such a young age because of what they've seen. And it's just heart-wrenching. I know we talked about this before we got on screen, and that is genocides seem such a huge thing to try and tackle. If I'm one person sitting in the United States thinking about how I can improve the world, to think I could stop a genocide or have some difference, make some difference 15,000 miles away on the other side of the planet, or as the Sharps did, to think that they could make a difference, two people in the middle of Prague in 1939 making a difference. I mean, it's incredible. And yet, what your message, I think, is, and the message from the movie, is that you can make a difference. And so I just wanted to ask you a little to talk about how can we tackle such a massive thing as a genocide, and how do you come at it?
You have asked the $1 million question, Thorin. But I should mention that there is a coalition of Jewish organizations here in the U.S. I believe it's called the Jewish Rohingya Justice Coalition, and American Jewish World Service based in New York is one of the main leading organizations of that. Incidentally, I used to work for HAWS before I came to USC. But I'd say the American Jewish community has actively engaged on the Rohingya issue since early 2017, even before the mass expulsion that happened at the end of 2017, because there was a smaller, I mean, not small, but a smaller expulsion in 2016. And so there has been a 4-year movement, essentially, in the international community where this issue has really gotten attention. And I think I can comfortably say that at no point have the prospects for international justice ever been so positive. Not only is there a case at the International Court of Justice, this is this is the state culpability, the state obligations of upholding the Genocide Convention is what the case is about. There is also a case at the International Criminal Court, which looks at individual responsibility, so individual perpetrators. And that's a different statute. That's the Rome statute looking at criminal culpability. I won't get too much into legal details. So that case has also been opened in the past few years. And there's also this universal jurisdiction case in Argentina, which I think will be replicated in many other places. And I won't go into the legal nuances, but universal jurisdiction is essentially this legal principle that says crimes that have been committed are so bad that, we don't trust that they can actually be tried effectively and fairly where they're happening, but we have a moral responsibility to try them where we are. And Argentina has taken up taken the lead on that. Never before has there been this much attention on one single issue at an international legal perspective. So just even though that is at the very high level, I think that would not have happened without the thousands and thousands of petitions and people reading the news and people asking questions and keeping it in the news to make sure that that it is in the news cycle and that we're not forgetting about it in this 24-hour news cycle. At the grassroots level, I think the ongoing challenge is to ensure that the Rohingya that they're actually part of this, that we're not just using victims as puppets, but they need to be a leader of their own movement, to give them agency and to give them, ownership of their own justice processes. And that means at the local level, I've spoken to Rohingya refugees, and what they think of as justice, their conception of justice is not revenge. It's not even for the military to go to prison. It's to have their land back, to have their kids go to school and become, teachers and nurses and doctors and engineers. And they can't do that in the country right now. So I think getting them onto that path, giving them some hope, is also a part of justice. And that's part of the development and humanitarian aid side that we can absolutely contribute to. While these ongoing legal processes at the international courts and in regional courts are happening. So it's a full range of engagement and ensuring that we're not forgetting the people who are most affected, or who are actually, the survivors of these crimes. And I think that's how we approach our work at UUSC, is ensuring that justice is a broad and comprehensive concept that we can all, contribute to. And it's by, I think, empowering, and even empowering sounds a bit condescending, but we can activate the potential that's within these communities that are so eager to overcome the generations of discrimination, administrative genocide. I mean, it's the other Holocaust museum, Holocaust Memorial Museum here in Washington, D.C. I'm in Washington, D.C., by the way. The Holocaust Memorial Museum here now has an online exhibition of the Rohingya issue, and they see this as a parallel to the genocide faced by other communities around the world, but a modern genocide, as I mentioned. And you can see step by step how the state took, very similar steps to Nazi Germany, of slowly eradicating, pulling back certain rights, taking out certain privileges, halting travel. It's really quite frightening how similar the cases are when you look at it from an administrative perspective. You realize that this is state crime. Genocide is systematic. It is not just random violence. This is systematic, and it is perpetrated with intent. And I think that's what they're trying to prove. When you see this and you hear the stories of people, and without, actually engaging with these communities, the evidence and the stories will never come out. And I think that's why these cases are so important, but also the engagement of the actual people. I can tell you, I'm losing track of time due to the pandemic. A little more than a year ago, a group of Rohingya refugees were able to learn about the Holocaust. And their eyes were, when I spoke with them, their eyes were just like, this is happening to us today. It was this light bulb moment of, we've learned so much from this experience. I think that the American Jewish community in particular has done a phenomenal job of engaging on the issue and trying to ensure that story is not repeated, and that we can learn from the inspiring stories that have happened, to really find those places of hope to move forward in a positive way.
I'm really glad to hear some of the things you're talking about, because I think sometimes we hear about not just the Rohingya, but the series of genocides that we know have been taking place. And we look back at the Holocaust, we say never forget, and we wanted to stop them from ever happening again. We know they've happened, and sometimes I think people feel powerless. And so I want to just highlight one thing you said, which is that we're in a better spot now to kind of confront what's going on in Myanmar or in Burma more than we've ever done before. And to highlight where you started, which is the UN declarations, and when I started with the UN declarations from 1948, setting a precedent that is being used today. And so to realize that those events that came in the wake of the Holocaust have changed the way the world confronts genocide today. And So I just want to point that out and draw
Absolutely.
attention to what you're saying there. And the other thing I wanted to ask, and I know we're running short of time, but I wanted to ask you about something relatively mundane or kind of down to earth, which is, what can somebody do to help? You know, what if somebody wants to try and stop genocide of the Rohingya? What are some things that we could do?
In the current Congress and in our political transition, I think between now and January 20th, there won't be much action, to be very blunt. But in the new Congress, I can say that there will be a new push to get co-sponsors for a genocide determination bill. And I think pushing your congressman to support that bill or to be a co-sponsor of that bill could have a drastic effect in how the US approaches this, both with respect to funding of refugee aid and with respect to supporting these international justice processes. That, I think, is the most concrete thing that people could do. And I'm happy to share that link once it's available. I was actually just on an email chain earlier today about how USC is going to engage its constituents in this new Congress and what are our advocacy asks in these first 100 days. Note that there has been this push over the past year, and due to political cycles, you know, it just didn't happen. And there are politics at play here, geopolitics of China, not wanting to upset the balance, you know, of the democracy process that has happened, and not wanting to disrupt Aung San Suu Kyi, frankly, the Nobel Peace Laureate, who's now the head of the country, or the de facto head of state. So it's getting beyond these politics to find out what we can actually do. And I think that's one of the first steps we can do. Otherwise, you know, there are so many refugee education programs that really can change someone's life. You know, and just witnessing one of those programs when I was 18 years old, I'm dating myself, when I was 18 years old, changed my life to work on this issue. And I think I still know people from that first weekend that I met who are now, you know, who've completed university abroad, who are resettled abroad and have come back to the country after being resettled, to help their country move on and to improve. And I want to see in 15, 20 years, I want to see Rohingya refugees who have been able to do that and have been able to, who can say the same thing. And I think that's, you know, it's education, it's ensuring that there's a next generation to keep fighting the good fight, frankly, because these issues will not disappear. You know, things will improve or they'll get worse, but there will always be a fight for dignity and justice. And I want I want to center the Rohingya people as much as I can to ensure that they have the opportunity to be their own leaders and to push their own generation to really take the mantle.
That's very helpful. And again, I think that we're often overwhelmed by these topics. And so I want to thank you for drawing our attention to them and to the practical. It may seem like writing our congressmen or our representatives is a small thing, but drawing attention to the needs of the Rohingya in this case, we know from the events in the 1930s and 40s that more noise by the American public to our representative to say, this is something that we need to work on as a nation, we need to be talking about this, that would have helped back in 1933 or 39 or 1942, and it's what will continue to help today, even though it's a small ask, right? Just to get us to write letters, but it can have a big impact. And then, as you say, sending, going overseas, going and seeing, and I know that kids in colleges all across the country, they look at overseas programs and they look at summer opportunities. And so to look at some of these programs that might be available to work with refugees is something certainly that I think we can think about and pass on to others. So with that, I want to thank you again for coming and joining us this evening and taking us from the sharp story to today and to draw some of those parallels and draw some of those lines. And Murray, I want to thank you for hosting our program and bringing this to us. Any last words for us, David, before we close the door?
just such a privilege, and I am such a huge fan of your work, and the more I learn about it, I look forward to hearing more, and love that you all are doing yoga next week. I can't say
Some of us.
I am really I'm privileged to be a part of this, so thank you so much for reaching out. And if anyone would like to keep in touch, please, Thorin, please feel free to share my email.
Yeah, we'll send it around with a link of this recording so that others can watch it who didn't have a chance. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody who watched.
Thank you,
Thank
Murray.
you, Murray.
Thank you.
Have a good night, everybody.
Take care.